Let's learn the true history of the barometer and how it works. Let's learn to separate fact from fiction. Let's begin, shall we?
Aristotle famously said, "Nature fears of empty space," when he claimed that a true vacuum, a space devoid of matter, could not exist, because the surrounding matter would immediately fill it. Fortunately, he turned out to be wrong.
No, that is a play on words. Nature abhors a vacuum. Nature cannot produce a vacuum on the earth. Only man can. When man intervenes and creates a vacuum can exist. A container, a contained environment, is required. Therefore, man intervening and making a vacuum does not negate the fact that nature abhors a vacuum, making this individual they call Aristotle correct. He was not incorrect.
A vacuum is a key component of the barometer.
And why is that? What barometer looks like this? Do you know why they use this? Why they illustrate this? I'm going to show you why. A barometer is an encapsulated, enclosed container where the fluid, or the water in this case, or mercury, has no contact with the outside air. Let's see why they do this. This right here is exactly why they show you this. So they can use two arrows pointing down to get you to believe that outside air pressure is pushing that water down and forcing a column of water up that tube. But that is not how this was made. A man, an individual, made this, and let's see how.
A long tube was filled with water and placed standing in a shallow pool with both ends plugged. The bottom end of the tube was then opened and water poured out into the basin until the level of the water remaining in the tube was 10.3 meters. A long tube was filled with water and placed standing in a shallow pool with both ends plugged. The bottom end of the tube was then opened and water poured out into the basin until the level of the water remaining in the tube was 10.3 meters.
Do you understand why they do this now with these arrows? These arrows pushing down on that water is what they're trying to illustrate here. But that's not how this was achieved. I just showed you how this was achieved. Okay, now if they got a tube and put it in there and the water went up it on its own, then they would have something. But that's not how this was achieved at all. Let's take a look.
A long tube was filled with water and placed standing in a shallow pool with both ends plugged. The bottom end of the tube was then opened and water poured out into the basin until the level of the water remaining in the tube was 10.3 meters.
Now, any alleged outside air pressure has nothing to do with this setup. You've just seen how they achieved this, and that these arrows pointing down, illustrating outside air pressure pushing down on that water, hence pushing that column of water up, is untrue. That is not how they achieved it. Do you understand? What barometer incorporates any fluid, water, or mercury having direct contact with outside air? None of them. They are encapsulated. They are separated. And this is propaganda. So what they want us to believe is birds, bees, plants, trees, paper airplanes, sandcastles, animals, and humans cannot directly feel or experience this outside pressure pushing down, which they compare and equate to the weight of an automobile. We can't feel it. We cancel it out. The plants and animals, sandcastles, and paper airplanes somehow evolved to withstand it. But this can detect it. How convenient. I'll tell you, it's a little more than convenient. This whole mechanism relies on the vacuum. And what is going on here? It is my pleasure now to show you. We are on Google, the dictionary, Oxford language, and the word in question is
Suction.
the production of a vacuum. How? By the removal of air. To what? In order to force fluid or matter, the gallstones, into a vacant space. The vacant space is the vacuum.
Suction.
The production of a vacuum by the removal of air in order to force fluid or matter into a vacant space or procure adhesion. So are we all clear why barometers incorporate a vacuum? If it was outside pressure, a vacuum would not be required. If outside pressure was pushing on the fluid in a downward vector, forcing water up the column, a vacuum would not be required. And we've seen how they achieved their little illustration there by pouring water out of a tube into a shallow pool. That's how they achieved it. My God, ladies and gentlemen, let's face reality.
A vacuum is a key component of the barometer. A vacuum is a key component of the barometer because the theory of Aristotle and other ancient philosophers regarding the impossibility of a vacuum seemed to hold true in everyday life. Because the theory of Aristotle and other ancient philosophers regarding the impossibility of a vacuum seemed to hold true in everyday life.
So per scientific physics, in reality, nature abhors a vacuum. Now they will tell you this individual, Aristotle, was incorrect because man intervened and created a vacuum with a container. That this man is incorrect. No, he's not incorrect. He is correct. Nature abhors a vacuum. Nature cannot produce a vacuum. Man can with a container. So they are using a play on words, smothered in word salad, to deceive you. This should be highly apparent.
A vacuum is a key component of the barometer.
So now, hopefully, you should understand why barometers must incorporate a vacuum. A vacuum produces suction. Outside pressure is not pushing down on that water, forcing that column of water up that tube. It is the vacuum. Do you not yet understand that?
Possible. A long tube was filled with water and placed standing in a shallow pool with both ends plugged. The bottom end of the tube was then opened and water poured out into the basin until the level of the water remaining in the tube was 10.3 meters.
Okay, so it should be highly apparent that the two arrows they'll use to illustrate some phantom force pushing down and then forcing water up is not how this is achieved. What I just showed you is how this is achieved. It creates a vacuum at the top, which then produces suction. If it was the other way around, then they could just stick a tube in the water and the pressure, alleged outside pressure, would push the water up. No, that's not how it's done. This is how it's done.
It was possible. A long tube was filled with water and placed standing in a shallow pool with both ends plugged. The bottom end of the tube was then opened and water poured out into the basin until the level of the water remaining in the tube was 10.3 meters. Aristotle famously said, "Nature fears of empty space," when he claimed that a true vacuum, a space devoid of matter, could not exist because the surrounding matter would immediately fill it. Fortunately, he turned out to be wrong. A vacuum is a key component of the barometer, an instrument for measuring air pressure. And because air pressure correlates to temperature, an instrument for measuring air pressure. And because air pressure correlates to temperature, and rapid shifts in it can...
Now here they tell you the truth. Air correlates to temperature. So when I say that a barometer works in lieu of humidity per water content in hot and cold air, that's how it truly operates. It is not air pressure. Why? Because we know what pressure is. The continuous force exerted on another object. You can feel and experience force, pressure, exerted on another object because it is physical. Let's take a look.
Pressure.
I don't like how that's spoken.
Pressure.
Yeah, whatever. Continuous physical force exerted on or against an object by something in contact with it. Okay, so if you can't feel or experience something, it's not pressure. So if we cancel out 14.7 psi, which they say is the weight of an automobile pushing down on us, because we ourselves, our bodies, exert the weight of an automobile, it's not pressure, because pressure is the continuous physical force exerted on or against an object by something in contact with it. So again, they use a play on words. High pressure, low pressure in meteorology is just hot and cold air. It is not the continuous physical force exerted on or against an object by something in contact with it. So now we know that this illustration is false, because outside pressure cannot push down on that water to force that fluid up. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to do this.
A long tube was filled with water and placed standing in a shallow pool with both ends plugged. The bottom end of the tube was then opened and water poured out into the basin until the level of the water remaining in the tube was 10.3 meters.
So do you understand what I'm saying here? And how convenient is it that they tell us oceans, birds, bees, paper airplanes, planes, sandcastles, plants, and us humans don't feel 14.7 psi, the weight of an automobile pushing down on us, because we've either evolved or we cancel it out ourselves. So how is this water feeling any of this pressure? They contradict themselves at every turn. Yes, that's correct. Now you know why barometers have vacuums. They create and produce suction. Let's face reality.